Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Bibliomancy for Beginners. This is the last episode in our trio of nonfiction picks, which means it is Taylor's pick. He can tell you about it if you would like, or I can. It's up to you, dude.
Well, I'll leave it to Gretchen to actually read the description, but this month we read Dead Mountain by Donnie Eichar, which is a sort of in the vein of true crime, but it's basically a documentary-style look at a disaster from a 1959 Russian hiking expedition. And it breaks down the history behind it, the theories, and his own experience tracking these secrets down.
Would you like me to read the back of the book, Michaela?
Yep, go for it.
Okay. So this is the book, Dead Mountain, and the back reads as thus. In February 1959, a group of 9 experienced hikers in the Russian Ural Mountains died mysteriously on an elevation known as Dead Mountain. Eerie aspects of the incident, unexplained injuries, signs the hikers cut open and fled their tent without proper clothing or shoes, a strange final photograph taken by one of them, and radiation readings on some of their clothes have led to decades of speculation over what really happened. This gripping work of literary nonfiction delves into the mystery, though unprecedented access to the hikers' own journals and photographs, many translated and reproduced here. Rarely seen government records, dozens of interviews, and author Donnie Eicher's own retracing of the hikers' fateful journey in the Russian winter. A fascinating portrait of the young hikers in the Soviet era and a skillful interweaving of their story. The investigator's effort and Eicher's contemporary examination here for the first time is the real story of what happened that night on Dead Mountain. Dun dun dun!
Yep. So this is a book club. We will be talking about the events in the book. If you don't want to be spoiled on what it is that may or may not have happened, according to Danny Eicher, then we will all give our spoiler-free reviews first, after which point we'll go into a spoiler section where we'll go into more detail discussing the different theories, the way the book was constructed, all of those things. But if you don't want to hear any of that, let's just start with our spoiler-free impressions.
I liked this way more than I thought I was going to. I was eerily creeped out by it, but I think that, a book, this usually won't happen if a book isn't well written, but I'll take even a mediocre constructed book that grips me. And I think even though I really didn't want to keep reading because I was like, this is kind of creepy, I want to sleep tonight. Then I wanted to keep reading and I wanted to keep going and I wanted to know what happened. There were definitely some things that made the book slow down and things that I didn't care about, things that I have comments about, but overall I just really enjoyed that. I wanted to know what was happening. I just also had to only read this book on nights when I knew my boyfriend was coming to sleep over in case I had nightmares, because I don't do well with spoofing. But yeah, in terms of nonfiction book, I think that it did really well building cinematic-esque suspense that kept you wanting to read, and it was interesting historically as well. So.
Okay. I liked it as well. Like Gretchen said, there were about a third of this book I could have done without.
And I bet you I know exactly which third. I think we agree.
That's a significant chunk of the book.
It may not be a third page-wise, but a third of the construction of this book I could have done without, if that makes sense. But the bits that I did enjoy, I enjoyed very much. So this might be one that I recommend folks listen to on audio because, like Gretchen said, it was very cinematic. And I feel like if somebody were to be reading this to me, it would be an interesting way to take in the story. but they wouldn't get all of the nifty pictures and stuff that are
There are a
in
lot
the
of nifty
physical book.
pictures.
They're very nifty pictures of 1950s Russians. Yeah, so if you're one of those people that likes conspiracy theory books or like alien theory books or government cover-up theory books, this is definitely one to look at. While it's not like an American government thing, like it's not JFK was shot by one person who was bending the bullet's path, blah blah blah.
But we could also say that it is an actually authentic and researched text.
Exactly. And it does give all the theories, so you get a bit of that like kooky,
so you get all the flavor, but
stuff,
also
science.
Yeah.
He doesn't discount anything just because it sounds silly, which I like. Because, you know, I really get the sense from him that he was like, I just couldn't figure it out. So I was like, okay, fine, time to like discuss, like, was it aliens?
Let's sit down at the table and talk. Was it aliens?
Yes, so there is that element to it, which was quite fun, actually. Like, I enjoyed that it wasn't just here's all of my research and what I think actually happened. It was that plus all of those other theories that people have had over time, and he talks about the evidence that points to certain things and the evidence that discounts certain things, which, you know, was super interesting to read about. So if you're, again, one of those people that likes hearing about weird phenomena, that's definitely one to pick up.
Cool. So how to introduce this? I found out about this book because I had heard and read about the Dilatov Pass incident a few years ago and found it to be really interesting. It plays into a lot of like the true crime or supernatural weirdness things. Like, I've always enjoyed those sorts of stories and events. Just as interesting things to get into. This ties into like the Russian cosmonaut sort of era and territory. So when we were looking at nonfiction books, I encountered this, and I thought that would be, for me, really fun to get back into and kind of toss you guys into the weird stuff that I thought Gretchen wouldn't enjoy. So I was a bit disappointed that she, you know, took it in stride so much. I was really happy with this book, actually. I was so eager to read it that I read it in 2 days right after we finished We the Drowned.
I read it in 2 days too. High five.
Because it goes really quickly and it's riveting, surprisingly. Even I can recognize the part I think you guys had an issue with. I don't think I had quite as much of one as you guys, but even with dips and the shifting sections, it kept me going. I thought it was really engagingly written. I think it did everything that I like in this genre, and it accomplished that all well. So I think, as far as just general impressions, we can go with that and get into the actual meat of it after the spoiler warning.
Yeah.
Okay. For all of you folks that would like to read the book, I think that we all recommended it. So definitely go do that. If you don't care about the spoilers because it's a historical event and therefore the spoils are things that happened in real life already very long time ago, please feel free to sit and listen to us discuss the mechanics of the book and things like that. Otherwise, we hope that you come back and watch it once you've finished. And that's that. So, yeah. Taylor, did you have something you wanted to start with?
I don't think I really need to lead off. I will say that if the Russian government has declassified this information, I think our book club can talk about it without too much of its spoilers.
So I mean, I think like the best starting point is probably where we've all like touched on in our non-spoilery, which is probably to start with the narrative of like the three-pronged narrative of it and what worked for that. Because I think I'm making an assumption that Michaela and I both disliked the same third, which is definitely a really big part of what kept me from being able to read it 4 stars. So if you haven't read the book and you're just here because you like listening to us speak, the book is Yeah, thank you. Hi. The book is written in 3 alternating perspectives. There's one storyline that is the hikers leading up to their deaths. The second one is from like the perspective of the search party and what happened after they disappeared.
Both
and
of
the
those
third,
using primary documents and first accounts to construct it as detailed as possible.
Yes. And then the third thread is Donnie Eicher's experience himself tracking and following the steps of the hikers. He actually goes so far as to hike Dead Mountain himself. And strangely enough, the part of this nonfiction book that I disliked the most was the purely nonfiction part that was Donnie Eicher's own story interacting with the past, because it just felt so much slower. Like for me, in that there wasn't as much engagement, and it felt like sometimes he was padding it out to make it worthwhile having inserted that chapter in between. And so while I did find some of the observations interesting, like how even there was a survivor technically from the journey of the past. He turned back halfway because he was in pain. So technically there was a Yuri Yudin who survived. And like how even he thought it was the government. And so I thought that was interesting. But like all in all, when it came time for Donnie Eicher's own portion of the book, I was like, flip, skim, give me back to like what was happening, until like the end when he started being like, I found science, and I was like, okay, cool.
But I might add that in particular, it was the middle bit about him hiking the pass that was boring. I was perfectly fine with everything of like his research, going to Russia, meeting the people firsthand. And the ending bit where he's like talking with science experts about some of his own theories and seeing if they are valid or not. But the middle bit of him hiking the pass was super slow because I didn't feel like we gained anything from it.
He didn't even gain anything from it besides having been there.
And been like, I did it. I was there.
I feel like he was like, I want a sticker. And like, I understand that for him, it was also extremely personal, like having spent so much time with this and wanting to see it. But because like it didn't lead him to really discover anything, I felt like that was just so much more of a personal mission than something that I was like engaged with the book.
I found that to be one of the most rewarding parts of his narrative, in part because of that. As you said, it's like deeply personal to him, but it's like this spiritually necessary act for like researchers who have done this. So he's saying like everyone who's like really serious has tried to make this trek, even if it's in like spring or anything. And the fact that he does it and sees nothing else, I found to be kind of important, because it's, if nothing else, important for his own credibility. Because if he jumped immediately into, and then I just figured out science, I'm so much smarter than everyone else, I think him having to go there and see all these things that hit all the same walls that everyone else did was, for me, a necessary part of that transition into then creating this next step that no one had ever figured out before.
I guess, but here's the issue though, right? So the other chapters around it are creating so much narrative tension. Even like the ones after the hikers have died, where like I know they're just gonna find the bodies and they're gonna be in like this weird, you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. Like even there was this construction of fantastic narrative tension, and then in between that, like interrupting it, was I climbed a mountain, I rode a snowmobile.
Whoa!
And I was like, what? No, I don't care.
I think
not because like I didn't. Go ahead, sorry.
I think part of that is because that journey for him happens at the moment of the most tension in the other stories, and it's the moment of least tension for him. At least, like, engagement-wise for Gretchen and I. I understand that it's like an emotional high for him, so it might have made sense to place it there. also chronologically that's where it was. So it because all three of these narratives are going chronologically, you just are cycling between them. But because you're like just starting to find the bodies and like just starting to, you know, like see all of these like aspects that are starting to become weird and interesting in the actual story, and then you're reading about a guy hiking the same thing and going, the things that were here when they were here aren't here anymore. I'm a bit sad about that. It just doesn't quite
No, I will definitely agree with you in
jive.
terms of pacing. It didn't quite fit, and that was more apparent for me where his final section felt really kind of after a lull, so a lot of that tension had been lost. I would have liked to see his section a little more abbreviated at the start, and then just being able to shift those up. And then hopefully keeping those tensions closer together. I don't have an exact cut in mind, but my issue with his narrative for the most part was, in hindsight, it seems a lot more like he's playing up this like Soviet conspiracy angle for like his confusion, because I understand like, oh, he's meeting with this guy who he doesn't understand in a strange airport bar for like 2 hours, and that being like something very important for him. But narratively, it just didn't really go anywhere because those were things that were never continued. The people did, but those are parts I felt could have been trimmed down rather than his own trek. I don't know.
Well, I mean,
Different
I'm going to
ways
be
to
honest.
look
From
at
the second I saw that it was 3 interweaving narratives, like, unless, especially because he's dealing with nonfiction events, like interweaving narrative like that, you can work together to perfection if you're writing a fiction novel because you can make things align. But the second I was like, oh, he's written a nonfiction piece with 3 interweaving narratives, I was like, at some point, this is going to fall down, because unless you really, really play up, you know what I mean? Like
this
real life
spiritual connection between past and present.
Well, yeah, but I just like, just in general, like 3 different real life narratives are not going to follow Freytag's pyramid at the same time. Like it's just not gonna work. And it was just frustrating that it happened at the time when the other 2 stories were, like Michaela said, at their highest tensions, and then he's like, mountain. And again, it would have been worth something if maybe he had, like, I had felt some kind of sense of discovery after the climb, but I didn't feel anything. And that was different for me too, because his other chapters with the tension, with everything, like I had felt the tension, I had felt the ghostly presence, I had felt all this, that, and everything else. Then he climbs the mountain, and I not only was like the tension lost in the middle, but I felt nothing. So it's just like the combination of that was just like, okay, and moving on.
Alright, so
aliens.
One narrative thread pacing a little wonk. But
by and large, I actually did enjoy the 3 narrative woven aspect of this. I felt like if it was any one of those, they wouldn't have worked quite as well. So, like, just because Gretchen and I had issues with that one section and that one piece, and mostly I think it was that we didn't connect with him on the same level that we did with the other characters, because that's really important. If you don't connect with him and his spiritual journey, then, you know, him climbing a mountain means nothing. It's
yeah. I mean, I'm gonna be honest. I mostly was just like, dude, you got a girlfriend and a little kid. What you doing? Like, I just had questions.
Well,
I have to hike this mountain.
I think we can also say that he couldn't leave out his own narrative and still have like his ideas at the end and have that be in any way.
No, I agree. I agree with
you can't really drop out his own trip up the mountain, even if he could have executed it better.
Right.
Writing wise, these are just parts that need to be in the story because they hold up other pieces.
Yes. No, I agree. Like, I wouldn't have cut it. I wouldn't have cut the 3-story structure. I thought that it lost its own tension. But no, I agree. Like, you couldn't have cut one of them You couldn't even have told them, like, if you had gone in chronological order 1 to 2 to 3, you know, it wouldn't have made as much sense. No, I agree entirely. So it's just that the construction at the crisis point fell through a little bit. But no, I agree. I wouldn't have taken any of it back.
Yeah. There's something else I wanted to say in regards to this, and I lost my train of thought.
You can come back to it.
Yes.
Yeah, maybe.
Do we have comments about the other 2 threads? I mean, while we're here.
Structurally, you mean, or just do we have other things about this book we want to talk about?
Well, I mean, I meant mostly the first, but yes to the second as well. So, I mean, like, because we're like, oh, this one part was really bad.
Yeah, I feel like we were starting off on a negative point, because we did all have generally fairly positive feelings about this.
Well, no, I mean, I just thought like we bring it up just because it was the one thing we all consistently mentioned.
Yeah.
And I think that part of the whole construction of the book that we also liked was the interlocking narratives, because Donnie Eicher had a really good sense of how to fit the pieces together of 3 very different stories. Like again, it's very hard. It's hard to write an interwoven story to begin with, period. Whatever, doesn't matter if you're writing fiction or nonfiction, but to be able to connect 3 separate stories in 3, you know what I mean? Like his ability to do that and to create a compelling narrative with nonfiction, you know, non-planned pieces was really amazing.
I feel like most nonfiction, if it's gonna braid, it sticks to 2. They're not brave enough for 3.
Yeah. Thank you. Braid. Oh my God. That is the word that I have been looking for like the whole time I've been talking about this, and I couldn't remember what it was. Oh my God.
Right.
You make a nice little fishtail of narrative.
Okay, so I have thoughts. I think the one that I enjoyed the most and was like the most captured by was actually the story of the rescue party / investigation. That was the bit that I enjoyed the most when reading, I think. And
actually, that makes sense. It makes a lot of sense. Never mind. I take my surprise back.
Like, tension-wise, that's the part that anybody reading this should be interested in, because it's the idea of like what happened to them. This is you finding out all of these details of like the actual physicality of the event itself. I don't care a whole lot about mountain climbing stuff, so the really nice narrative of them climbing the mountain, which helped us create attachments to the characters' personalities and like feel bad when they died, even knowing they died, wasn't quite as engaging to me as the like mystery element of like, where did they go? They were all competent hikers and they didn't come back, so let's go try and find them. And oh no, we found a body that doesn't have a tongue. What the heck?
Yeah,
I think
it's all the CSI stuff. Of course you'd like it, Michaela. Again, I'm sorry, I was surprised. I'm like, they're just excavating bodies. And then it's all of like the strange mystery stuff.
Yeah. And I also will say that for a predominant amount of the book, it felt like most of the answers that we wanted about what did happen were coming from the rescue party portion, just because it took a really long time. I mean, I say long time, it's not a long book, but it wasn't really until the end that Donnie Eicher's narrative started producing in like things. But I will say that I think Michaela said something that reminded me. I thought that he did a really good job. There's 9 people in this party that died, and I thought that he did a sadly good job at connecting us to the people that each one of them were, and giving us just enough background and giving us just enough personal detail without bogging down the novel trying to tell us, you know, I mean, there's 9 people.
But
Like,
there's
that's,
like one good story at least for every one of them.
yeah. So I thought that he had an excellent grasp of how much was just enough to make you feel really, really sad when it came back around to their, like, the story of them being alive and climbing the mountain, because you're just like, no, you're gonna die.
No.
And I mean, you feel, it's just, those sections just fill me with so much melancholia, because I was just like, oh God, I feel attached to you. And so I really, really liked that, but I agreed that I think that the rescue party was the most interesting, because again, it felt more like the whodunit mystery for most of the book than Donnie Eichers did, because he was effectively investigating and unearthing all this other stuff before being able to make his conclusions at the end. But yeah, that was probably my favorite as well.
I think, was it? I'm thinking to the stories of them, Gretchen, because I agree. I think you did a phenomenal job of bringing each of these people to life. But I think it was Xena, one of the women who he's talking about on a previous expedition, had accidentally been shot in the leg by someone and had to be carried down a mountain. She's just like making jokes the whole time. And those, like, obviously the statement of, knowing them makes it hurt more when they die is kind of obvious, but like seeing those moments when they had overcome danger and death in the past made it even worse for me.
Yeah.
But
it also added to the suspense of like the mystery, because in doing all of this, it proved their competency. That even having been shot in the leg, she still made it down a mountain. Like,
but I mean, like, just like, and this is why this, I have to just, I wouldn't want anybody to read this without having the pictures present, because just like pictures like this, which is them on their journey, going up the mountain, they're all having such a good time, and like I would turn the page and see that and just be like, ow, my heart.
It's just a team of young, handsome Russians smiling and singing. And
like the fact that, but it's also the fact that it's like the 2 days before they died. Like, I can't believe that like that film was still okay when they got the cameras. Like, holy moly!
Yeah.
Like, it's eerie. It's eerie, and it's just like.
This is the reason why the first section, so just taken from their journals and their photos and piecing together their travel, was my favorite part of the book, even though I absolutely agree the most engaging parts were like, other ones. But that's always kind of what's drawn me to this sort of disaster, true crime nonfiction, much to my own suffering, in that the stories of the victims, even like when you're reading about serial killers, it's always the victims and their experiences that is far more interesting to me than like what dear old H.H. Holmes is doing with all that murder and fun. Like, that's never really what draws me in.
That's where we differ.
I know, and that's perfectly valid, and it's a little, I expect it must be a little easier for you then, because I go into these stories and the thing that I'm looking for is just pure suffering on my part. I don't get any of that reward. The end of it is just, it's all been built up and then they die anyway.
They die. Why hurt yourself?
Because
that's why I don't like to read these novels at all.
It's like an inverted bell curve of agony, or maybe not.
See,
bell curve?
Maybe that's why I dislike things like that, because I have the ability to like distance myself from the victims and be like, yes, it's sad. Yes, they were in the prime of their life, but because I know they died, all of that means nothing. It's like irrelevant. Like, in a way, my brain does that. I
don't know if I could do that because I've never tried. So I just choose not to. Anyway, so the reason why I think more than anything this book stuck with me was, like, his actual solutions and examination and his own research is definitely secondary to him just creating this really heartbreaking and moving story. And I guess that's why transitioning into the final chapter, after he reveals, like, this is what I think happens, where he just makes a fictionalized account using everything he's learned about, like, this is what it would have been like, was utterly devastating for me. This was also in, like, that book reading section around We the Drowned and those other ones where, like, 5 or 6 books in a row, like, I just cried at the end. It was just a mess.
I also think that it was really nice too. I didn't get the sense. So like this whole book was like, well, and like these people have this theory and this is what this research has done, and there's this whole like organization dedicated to figuring out what the hell happened. Also, like at the end when he comes up with this very scientific way to explain what happened to them, there's no like I figured it out where no one else could kind of a thing.
I mean,
you know what I mean?
He really makes a strong point of saying, this is technology. This is... Michaela, are you crackling over there? Shh. Sorry, it's getting louder. It's getting louder. Shh. No, Gretchen, how he was saying, like, this is science and research that didn't exist 5 years ago, and they still have, like, basically no idea what it is. There's no way 60 years ago this would have been possible.
Yeah, because I mean, obviously, when I started the book, I figured that he wouldn't have written it if he hadn't found some kind of a solution. And I did like that for a while there. I was like, I think he's going to end up saying like aliens did it. I think that he's just going to end up being like, I got no idea. But then he comes up and he doesn't necessarily come up with it. I like that he has to kind of like be like, well, maybe this is related. And it's just like, it's like this little, like, this might be related. And then that scientist leads into another scientist. And then he ends up being like, his mind is blown too by the fact that this could really work. And then then he's not like, I'm smarter than everybody else. He's just like, wow. I like that he
have the connections he needed to actually figure everything out.
Yeah. And then he couches it in like, oh my gosh, like if this was true, can you imagine this being the final moment of your life?
So I guess, should we break down just for like what he is actually talking about, because we haven't gone into any details and we are in the spoiler section. So Gretchen, do you want to actually explain that idea in a limited way or gloss over it?
So he ends up saying that the reason that they all died was because of something called infrasound. Infrasound is a I believe it's an inaudible frequency, correct?
Sort of.
But like, I mean,
it's inaudible, but it still causes reactions to the human body,
including auditory hallucination.
Yeah. So, but it's not like somebody screaming. In a very sinister way, it's a sound you can't hear that causes extreme panic and other violent reactions in the body. And it ends up usually being centered in some place. So the Dilatov camp ended up being like smack in the middle of an infrasound vortex because
go on.
No, because the mountain around them created, and the weather created the perfect conditions for like a 1 in a million event of infrasound, basically.
And it's this amazing dark irony, because the mistranslation of the mountain has always been Dead Mountain, or like basically the place we don't go to. When actually the Mansi tribe, I believe it is, or the local central Russian tribe, call it Dead Mountain because trees don't grow there. It's just a barren hilltop. And so that lack of vegetation is what allows for the wind to travel in that way that created it. So in like a complete ass backwards sort of way, Dead Mountain was actually the deadly thing.
Yeah. And also, and so to finish what I was saying though, so the infrasound vortex hitting the tent caused like a very primal base reaction in all 9 hikers that made them panic, and that's why there were cuts in the back of the tent that came from the inside. Like they tried to like cut their way out of the tent. That's why they all ran out without their clothes on.
And scattered without any preparation into the night.
Yeah, because they were all filled with this intense primal fear of like that they had to get out and go. And
I mean, he also said the wind would also have been making the sound like a train coming down on them.
Yeah.
So it'd be a little frightening.
One of the interesting things that I also think is that, hold on, I want this quote.
Cool.
As
you look for that, I will say, before we did this, I sent Michaela and Gretchen a link to a Russian documentary from the 90s, basically that I had been watching a bit of, and it's not very good. Like, it's not very well produced. It's kind of poorly written and translated. But the comments section was an absolute delight, because it's just running down all of these conspiracy theories of like people arguing for and against. And of those who had clearly read Dead Mountain, even the alien truthers were saying, it's the sound thing, not aliens here. And I've been beneath an alien ship. I can tell you this.
They're not aliens, not real aliens.
He's like, nope, this is good science. And I'm like, yeah, good for you, dude.
Okay, I found it. So when the original investigation was closed in 1959, they really didn't have an explanation for what had caused the hikers to leave their tent with no clothes, something like that, except for the main investigator, Ivanov, said that the reason that they died was a, quote, unknown compelling force, unquote. And, like, talk about, like, eerie irony. Because until, like, less than 5 years ago, infrasound was something that was an unknown compelling force of some kind.
So his report line, which has just fed so much conspiracy in itself of people saying, like, even the Russian government says it's like fucking ghost aliens.
It was actually
not just
true.
aliens.
His unknown thing
using
was
the
the
resonant
truth.
pyramids from Atlantis.
So yeah, I thought that was maybe one of the most interesting things was that like Ivanov was actually right. Like, he wasn't his like one-liner "gotta close this case, okay, bye" was like was
this
true.
This ununderstandable energy that it, yeah, basically, and it's the same thing with that dark irony of the mountain's name.
Yeah,
it's like we've kind of been talking around it without any way to understand what it was, but there it is.
I, when reading all of that, was like super thrown back to me at like 14 watching like the Ghost Hunters TV show, and them explaining like how some of their machines measure particular like infrared things or something like that, and discussing how like they would say this is both common in areas where there's paranormal activity, but the reaction that being there is in a human body is to cause discomfort and like the feeling of like I don't want to be here. So every time like a human has that like reaction where they can't actually explain the like physical, just like I feel sick to my stomach, I feel like I don't want to be like all of those childhood fears of not wanting to be in the basement or not wanting to be in the attic feel justified, because like it's like a scientific phenomena that actually creates that within a person. So it's like super interesting to read about that, but like on a huge unfortunate scale.
Seeing how subsonic and supersonic frequencies, so like literally scientifically demonstrable things, but also not technically perceived by us.
Yes.
Yeah, it is interesting, but unless it's, I don't know, massive moles or bats like sending out signals, I'm not sure what the primal justification of that basement fear is, Michaela.
Hey man, It had something to do with some sort. I don't. It again. This is like 14-year-old me. I don't exactly remember the. Sure, but it wasn't just geothermal. But still.
But before we start talking about 14-year-old Michaela's geothermals, I would also like to say that for a while I became convinced that the government conspiracy thing was going to win out. Just because after, I thought that one of the most interesting things was how many weird things the Russian government did for eventually, potentially, never being involved.
Like, I think we could just say, for all of modern history, the many weird things the Russian government did that we couldn't figure out. They do a lot of strange things, Gretchen. I don't think they understand why they do most of it.
It's just like, why try to look guilty? Like, they literally...
Paranoia.
But, like, oh my god, like, you know, trying to be weird about the funerals, like...
And, like, spreading things out. I think it's just... keep daily life. As soon as people start doing different things and seeing like strange disasters, you mess up the status quo.
It was
like every small town.
From like some of the things that they were explaining and talking about in the time period, it is possible that the Russian government was doing something unrelated nearby that made them...
Yes.
So, like, if they were in fact testing nukes in the area, which is possible, it isn't necessarily what caused
very possible.
The Dilatov-esque incident, but it is something they could have been doing. It would have made sense for them to be like, we don't know that this caused this, but just in case it did, shh.
Yeah.
Stop, shh,
you have to appreciate there would have been a meeting of like all these Russians sitting down like, so did we do this? Is this our fault?
Please don't try to do a Russian accent.
I had it there for half a sentence and then it fell apart. I blame your laughter.
Even just like the fact that they still have some of the documents classified. Like,
yeah.
Like, man, I just want to know what's in them. I literally think that it is the transcript of that meeting where they were all sitting there going, so which of the secret things mildly close to this could have caused this?
They run down a checklist of 30 things. Of like, same thing all the investigators doing, like, glowing lights. No, that was the previous week. We had that one under control.
Exactly.
It's not this.
Yeah, it's not this.
Was it this nuke test? What was the preparation for the other nuke test? We don't know.
Yeah.
I like that they.
So it is.
The
it
actual
possible
radiation measurement, they would have been like, okay, that was probably just runoff and not from one of our things. And it's the same thing, like, a lot of these details, because I had been reading, I had read or heard of almost every single thing that they found at that site with very different framings where people deliberately kind of trail off on things, like with they were missing a tongue. And they make no comment to like, oh yeah, but her face was in a riverbed. And this is soft tissue that would, you know, be broken down a lot faster by things in the water, as opposed to people just implying something had torn her tongue out.
Yeah, and I mean, even just like the slash marks in the tent, if you then don't clarify that like the slash marks were made from the inside, well, you wouldn't, I think, assume, oh my god, slash marks in the back of the tent, like, sounds like somebody broke in.
And even Donnie Eichar makes those points for some things, like with the cutting, where he first says, you know, there were cuts in the tent, and he kind of goes down what people were thinking about it, and then he says, but then they clarified, they figured out they were very clearly from the inside. And like, oh, it wasn't this stove that had like caused noxious fumes, which is another thing people in that YouTube comment section were talking up of like, yeah, there was like someone went outside, caught a backdraft, and then it wasn't venting properly, and they were all choking on CO2. It's like, no, it just wasn't built yet.
Yeah.
And so it's also
they know it wasn't built yet because of X, Y, Z, blah, blah.
And so just the meticulous way he breaks these down is really superb. reporting, because he's certainly not the first person to do a book about this or a special, but he did it.
While not making any theory sound dumb. I think that it would have been really easy for him to be like, I mean, he does talk about his personal feelings towards it, but like it would have been really easy to be like, oh my God, conspiracy theorists, oh my God, people who say it's aliens, like just shut the fuck up.
But no.
It was very clear that he was after a scientific explanation, but he didn't make it sound like those explanations were less than either.
But only through thorough elimination, not tossing things out. Like, Gretchen, you said you were convinced it was going to be a government conspiracy from his reading. And that's what I thought until right before his chapter when he breaks everything down, basically. Because he's just very impartial about presenting this information, where to a point you could say, well, it could be a number of these things, because he has given us a lot of information that could be read in many different ways.
Yes, and that's the other thing I enjoyed, was that he did keep his findings till the end and didn't like explain it at the beginning and then had that like woven throughout, where he was like, people have thought this, but I know the truth, and like he kept everything valid throughout the entire book until
very clearly unbiased reporting, which is why one of the reasons why this is such a great and successful book. My interpretation. It's just, it does it properly.
Yeah, and I mean, but also, I mean, I wouldn't say unbiased, because like, you know, he talks about how disappointed he is when, you know, the people behind the foundation and like Yuri Yudin are all like, yeah, it was definitely the government. Like, he's like, you know what I mean? So
I felt that was more his disappointment that they weren't actually looking for answers, but they were just sticking with their prior assumptions. But no,
but I mean, like, in the way, in the sense,
not an accurate statement on my part.
Yeah, no, because you know how he wants to solve it, and I don't think that even if he had come up without a scientific explanation, I don't think that he would have come out and said like, sure, maybe it was a conspiracy. I think that he would have ended it on like, somewhere out there is a scientific you know what I mean? Because he was so very clearly looking for a scientific explanation, but he was upfront about the fact that he was looking for a scientific explanation, and that made all the difference of him producing all the other information. Because it wasn't just that I felt like he was trying to produce every single side. It was, I knew that he was taking the time to look at every single side, despite his preference for discovering a scientific solution. And that gives him more credibility to me than someone pretending to present an unbiased collection of evidence, because nobody's unbiased. That's a lie.
Yeah.
I really, really wanted it to be the one like old dude that joined their party at the last minute and have him be like a serial killer.
Alexander Zolotari.
Yeah, the dude who like clearly did not fit in, was not one of the friends. Nobody knew him, and he just tagged along. I was like, I want him to like end up being like a serial killer who, once they're far enough away from everybody, decides to murder everyone. And then I was sad because it was science.
Turns out he was just a mountaineering guide, and they were all very friendly in central Russia.
So nice. Random other Russian guy.
He was a nice singer. He had some fun songs.
No, I know. And then I was like, ah, dang it. Because like the way that he introduced that guy felt weird. So I guess that's part of the reason where I was like, you're weird. He was like, this random guy that nobody knew decided to be part of the party. And I was like, huh, interesting.
I've seen this movie.
That didn't send off any red flags for me. So I guess I was just buying into this very communal atmosphere of this Soviet, like, not really in the center of Soviet government. It's just like out in the wastes at this Polytechnic Institute where things are a little more free. Like, they talk about love a lot, and they're very idealistic with their approaches. I wanted to believe in the best of all of them.
That's fair. Yeah. I don't have anything else to say. Do you guys have anything else to say?
If I did, I forgot it.
Yeah, I think I had things. See, there's an American film that came out in like 2012, like 5 American hikers who go up to trace this path and gets into like the truth of it, which I think is Yetis.
Oh, of course, the Yetis.
There's
It's
the
always
video
the
game
Yetis.
Colat, which I've played.
Yeah, I watched you play that one.
It
I was
is-
going to say, is that based on this? It sounded like
It
it was based on this.
It is based off of this. It is far too spooky for me to play, but that is
Spooky.
either ghosts or aliens. I'm not really sure, but they seem to be like strange, extraplanar beings that are terrifying when they kill you. I cannot play that game in a bright room. I cannot play it with other people there. I'd like to see the end of that game someday. I'm never gonna. So clearly it is a story that has captured different imaginations in different ways, and it all comes down to wind.
Right.
Spoopy wind.
Spoopy wind. Okay, yeah, so this was the last of the nonfiction books. The next cycle is Reader's Choice again, so we all just picked a book that we were interested in reading. I start off the cycle, so we are going to be reading, hopefully this shows up, Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy, speaking of Cold War Russia stuff.
Okay. I'll have to actually... I forgot what your choices were, so I don't have any of these books yet.
If you're like Taylor and you forget what our choices are, you can always go to the Goodreads page and check and see, because I have been updating that and making sure it's been on track. So that will be linked down below. I haven't done it yet because we were running late today. It's probably something I should have done while Taylor was figuring out his technical difficulties, but I didn't because I'm lazy. I will go back and fix that, though, eventually. So yes, espionage thriller during the Cold War, a novel, a very famous one, and there's a film that's also quite famous.
Le Carre is kind of like the heaviest hitter of spy intrigue stories, so we're going to the ultimate,
the espionage thriller writer.
Yeah.
And then we return to YA.
Yes.
What's
again? I will.
Sorry.
Mine is Illumini by Jay Kristoff and Amy
Illumini, and then I'm going to Iron Cast, so we're just hanging out in that YA back bay with still waters out in the tumultuous ocean of Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy.
On that note, I will also say that I did add a discussion forum on the Goodreads page for anybody who has suggestions of themes, because we do enjoy having a theme to pick books out of. It helps us sort of stay on track, and we change our reading habits and also have interesting discussions. Like this nonfiction run was quite interesting. So if you have any ideas of a theme, whether it's something like a genre, something like books with cats on the cover, like our
that could actually be fun
challenge. Books with cats on the cover.
Yeah, like there's a lot of different ways we can take that.
I think we should all read a cozy mystery.
No, thank you.
To Die For. I've got that one on my shelf.
Futuristic Violence in Fancy Suits has a cat on it.
Okay, yeah, we've already got a range of genre.
But anyway,
we should
please
also
go to the Goodreads and do that. Thank you.
We should also mention that I believe we are extending our giveaway.
Oh, yes. So we were supposed to be announcing the winners of our giveaway, but we have not had anybody enter it because we're bad at promoting it. So that's a thing that we need to get on top of. We'll do the same thing. Let's say in a month we come back next book club and announce the winners, because after that it'll be too fall to give people summer beachy reads.
Am I allowed to join this giveaway? And you can just give me your books?
You can go to the video where we announce it and do everything that everybody else does. And then you may get chosen to randomly receive either my 2 books or Gretchen's 2 books that we chose to send to people.
I'm not a part of that division of the Bibliomancy family, so I don't think I'd be against any rules doing that.
No. Yep, so we each picked one book that we disclosed, and then we each picked a secret book that we're also going to give with the book that we disclosed. So yes, go and do that. It got really dark in here over the course of this.
Yeah.
Yes, it did.
There's just going to be a hand that reaches forward now and pulls you back. That'll be the end of the stream.
Yep, that'll be it. Okay, so we will see you guys like this in a month's time to discuss Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. Gretchen and I will be back in the interim doing our normal stuff. I have a ARC review on Friday that's coming out.
I have a bunch of reviews planned for Monday, or like I could do for Monday, and I haven't picked which one I want to do yet. So it's going to be a surprise for all of us what comes out on Monday.
Okay. All right, then we are all set. Have a good night, guys, and talk to you again soon.
Bye-bye.
Night.